You're listening to Nutrition Matters podcast with Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist. Nutrition Matters podcast explores how to approach food and your body in a whole new way. I interview people who share stories and expertise in rejecting diet culture, making peace with food, and discovering a more positive, realistic, and sustainable approach to health and well-being. I'm Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist, and owner of Positive Nutrition, an in-person nutrition therapy practice in Salt Lake City, Utah. I offer free resources, including this podcast, a blog, and posts on social media. If you're local to Salt Lake City, check out our services and availability for appointments, and keep your eyes out for in-person groups on mindfulness, intuitive eating, body image resilience, and more. Go to positive-nutrition.com and hit subscribe if you'd like to keep in touch. I also offer online courses covering topics like the science of nutrition, mindfulness, and healing your relationship with food. Check those out at positive-nutrition.com/academy. If you like what you hear on the podcast, you can make a difference by leaving a review, sharing with friends and family, or making a donation. Thank you so much for your support. You can also find me on Instagram or Facebook if you'd like to have a little more food for thought at Paige Smathers RD. Thank you so much for listening. Hi everyone, welcome back to Nutrition Matters podcast. My name's Paige and I'm your host. And I'm so excited to bring this conversation I had with Tali Rai, author of the book Train Happy. We talk about intuitive eating and how it relates to fitness and exercise, and kind of how to apply some of the principles that we talk about a lot having to do with food, how we can work on our relationship with exercise and cultivate a healthier, more positive approach to how we're moving our bodies and how we're resting our bodies. So thanks so much for joining us. I'm really excited about this conversation, excited to share it with you. There is a little section where I share about kind of what I'm finding interesting about movement right now, and Tali and I kind of have a little back and forth sort of exploring what that means and why I'm saying what I'm saying. And I think as I listened back, I was like, oh, I could have probably explained that a little bit better. But I hope it's clear in the podcast. I am not saying that what I'm finding interesting is what you should be finding interesting with movement. I am not advocating for, really anything other than just trying to connect to learning more about yourself and learning more about what feels good in your body. So hopefully that little section is clear to you. I think it is, but yeah, it was a really fun conversation. Tali has obviously she's such a thoughtful person who's done so much work in this arena and so much important work for the world of fitness. And I'm just really grateful to her for coming on the podcast and sharing her expertise with us. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Thanks again to everyone who leaves reviews and who supports the podcast. If you're interested in contributing $5 a month to support the podcast, you can also receive access to 3 extra podcast episodes per month. One is a guided meditation, one is a nutrition lesson, and one is a Q&A podcast episode. So I put that out there for podcast supporters, and it's exclusive content that I make just for the people who are supporting the podcast. So if that sounds interesting to you, or if you can and would like to donate or contribute, you can click the link in any show notes and become a subscriber of the podcast, and then get access to the Nutrition Matters premium content. So with that all being said, thanks again so much for being here. Thanks for being such loyal, fabulous, wonderful listeners. I'm grateful to you. This is such a fun part of my job, and I hope you enjoy this conversation with Tali. Hi, Tali. Welcome to Nutrition Matters podcast, and I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Paige. As you know, I'm a fan of this podcast, so I am very excited and honored to be a guest.
Oh, well, thank you. And right back at you. I'm so excited to dive into your work and your story and your newest book. So let's get into it. Will you take a minute, Tali, and talk about kind of just some basics of who you are and what you do, and kind of then we'll dive into more of the specifics.
Yeah, so I'm a personal trainer. I've been working as a personal trainer for about 5.5 years now. I'm based in London in the UK, and I've consistently worked there. And my work really reflects a kind of personal and professional journey and, you know, involvement that's obviously come from a place, well, not necessarily obviously, but I think has definitely come from a place where I was pretty consumed with diet culture. And I originally went to drama school, so my original background was wanting to be in musical theatre, wanting to do kind of West End stuff in the UK. And I realised during that training I was having there, I kind of got into fitness as a bit of a coping mechanism and to find some sort of identity whilst I was at drama school. And I discovered this kind of a love for fitness at the time that was borderline obsessive. And I became a personal trainer as I graduated and have worked in the fitness industry ever since. But like I said, that's really evolved, and I've come to understand what diet culture is, how much it was kind of guiding my version of health, my perceptions of health, and how it had impacted the way I viewed my body, but also the way I viewed other people's bodies and the way I trained clients and worked with them. So I now work from a kind of weight inclusive stance. I'm, really trying to integrate the kind of intuitive eating practice within fitness and how that could apply to our relationships with fitness. I think there's so much discussion about relationships with food, but as someone who's had a tricky relationship with fitness, I really am passionate about how we can, have a relationship with have an intuitive relationship with our bodies and the way we move. That was heavily inspired, of course, by Evelyn and Elise's work with intuitive eating and their principle of joyful movement. So discovering health at every size, and that put a lot of the pieces of the puzzle together for me and very much informs where I work from now.
Yeah, so it sounds like you started to kind of dive into the books and the resources about intuitive eating, and you recognized, hey, there's a little bit of a gap between the intuitive eating work and then just this one little section about movement, and you're kind of saying, hey, let's explore how these very same principles and ideas can inform a more healthy approach to how we move our bodies, right?
Yeah, that was exactly it. I discovered intuitive eating. I, listened to the podcast, read the books, and I was like, wow, this really makes so much sense for me. Where are the people in fitness talking about this? And, where are people, where I started to kind of use principles of intuitive eating, it kind of questioned, how I engaged with fitness. So, for example, um, the way that we kind of neutralize food as not good or bad, but it's neutral. I had to do that with fitness for myself because for a long time I deemed some exercises good because I was told that they were best for fat loss. They were the best to get, quote, results, which I think is always in the fitness world code for uh, shrinking your body in some manner. And so I wanted to try and neutralize fitness for myself. And, I thought things like yoga and Pilates and weren't any good because they didn't make you sweat enough. You didn't burn enough calories when you did those things. And as I've got a greater understanding of how beneficial fitness can be for your mental and physical well-being, you realize that everything has its place and that it is neutral and that there is no good and bad. It really is about what is right for the individual. And I think a lot of the fitness industry operates from a place of ego, where it's very much informed by what can make me look my physically best. And therefore, we ignore what makes us feel our best. And, that's really my kind of angle at which I approach fitness. I want people to feel their best, but I also want people to feel good in the process of trying to feel their best. rather than feel like they're constantly chasing their tail, which is how I think you feel with diet culture. It's never quite good enough. It's never enough. Like, you always could be doing more. Your body could look better. Your if in the context of fitness, your muscles could be more defined. You could have a lower body fat percentage. All these things. Um, and I had that feeling of like personal disillusionment of I'm fed up of participating in fitness where it never feels good enough. And I want to find an enjoyment in that. And I think that principle of joyful movement within intuitive eating is an awesome starter point. And I just felt it needed expanding on.
Yeah, that makes sense. And in my experience as a dietitian working individually with clients, a lot of times what happens is we talk a lot about their relationship with food and the things that are kind of unpacking the things that are getting in the way of them approaching food in a way that helps them feel good and function well and feel sustainable and realistic in their life. And some of the things that you've already mentioned, like trying to work on a more neutral approach to food and trying to work on the all or nothing mentality so many have toward food. And I could list probably 10 other very common things that I work on with people. I often tell them, just kind of giving them a little insight, especially in the beginning of our process together. I say, these things that we're talking about together, it does feel like it's about food specifically. But what you'll notice is as you work on these skills and these tools and this approach with food, you can't help but find it kind of trickle into other areas of life, whether maybe that's movement or relationships or your job or so many other facets of life. You start to just realize, oh, I am working on self-compassion with food, but now it's easier to work on that with movement. And that's what I love about your work too, Tally. It's kind of like it doesn't really matter where you want to start. If you're working on your relationship with exercise right now, just think of how like amazing and positive it will be when all of those skills you're learning there can start to trickle into relationships and your professional life and maybe your relationship with food. So, do you find that too, that this is just kind of very connected skill set that then can expand out as people get better at it with food or with exercise? Do you find that too?
Yes, absolutely. And speaking from, personal experience, like I've really been on a kind of real journey of myself of like I said, I was a very early in my 20s, I was very obsessive and controlling around food, and a lot of that was because diet culture told me that food had to be tracked on an app, and that's how I should relate to food, and food should be something I control to get my body to look a certain way. And all of that unlearning, all of that process of building that trust with your body through the principles of intuitive eating, and building that interoceptive awareness, that is a transferable skill. Once you start building that trust with your body, you realize that you need to trust your body in so many different aspects of your life. And recently for me, I've done a lot of my food and fitness healing, and now I'm really on the emotional stuff, and now I'm digging deeper because that layer's been lifted and I can really get to like the core of the issues for me personally in therapy. And it's been really interesting how that trust with my body and understanding that sensation and almost that kind of embodiment factor makes me able to be more in touch with my emotions, more in touch with when I need to rest, when I need to go. And that has been really interesting for me because that's a relatively new skill set for me. And this is a relatively new work for me personally. And I found it really interesting how this is all linked. These are not separate issues. This is very much, they overlap and intertwine. And yeah, I think if anything that can come out of doing the work of intuitive eating and, um, you know, becoming more intuitive with fitness and exercise is about building trust with yourself and really knowing that you know yourself best. And I think with that, I've just been reading, I don't know if you've read Untamed by Glennon Doyle,
It's on my
but
list, but I haven't read it yet.
well, it totally, she talks about your knowing. in the book a lot about your knowing and how we, particularly women, we are taught to distrust ourselves and the ways in which we, betray our own trust almost and, betray our knowing and, have had our knowing, she calls it, gaslit by the world. And I was like, yeah, this is what it is. This is it. Like you're knowing that intuition that you have inside of you can help you, have a relationship with food in the way that you want it, the same way with fitness, but also the same way with, your friends, your family, your community, your work. I truly think they are um, related and, you know, like I said, overlap. And yeah, this is not just a food and fitness thing at all. And it certainly hasn't been for me. I mean, it's really changed the kind of direction in which I was going massively in a hugely positive way.
Oh, that's so beautiful. All right, I want to ask you one more question before we dive into talking more specifically about the book. But I wanted to share with you, Tally, and then get your thoughts. I've noticed recently that movement in particular feels to me to be one of the most powerful ways to work through things that maybe sometimes I feel like kind of stuck if I just sit and think about it, or if I am talking about it, or if I'm processing it mentally. There just sometimes it feels like there's just so much, only so much I can do mentally. And then some things like going on a walk or being out in nature and moving my body or going on a bike ride somehow just seems to like moving my body seems to give me access to kind of processing and healing on a different level. And I started to look at movement as almost more interesting in that way than interesting on a physical plane for me. Like it's just, gosh, I've just noticed that as I get curious about my thoughts while exercising or my even hesitation or like feeling like, oh, I don't want to do that, or whatever it is that comes up around it, I just find that it's almost more interesting on that mental level than it is on a physical level for me right now. And I'm finding it as I just try to sort of sit back and notice and not necessarily get too tangled up in those thoughts and just observe. I'm learning a lot. I want to hear your reaction to that though. What's your experience with that as someone who's thought a lot about this stuff?
Yeah, so maybe I can ask you a question further. So do you feel that you're finding that you're observing the way you engage in exercise more, or were you in terms of uh, being able to process thoughts almost during that kind of physical time?
Yeah,
Is
so it's twofold. I think,
Yeah.
there's been times where I've had some real emotional upheaval and I just feeling really upset and just feeling like I just can't, you know, process. And then I move, I do yoga or I go outside on a hike or something, and like something about moving my body just really clears my mind. There's that, but then
Mm,
there's also the experience of noticing when, like a good example would be I have a treadmill in my house, and when it's snowing here and I can't really get outside, I like to hop on there and jog or walk or something. And just noticing how different it feels mentally for me hopping on a treadmill versus a different type of movement, like getting less caught up in that, like, oh, I'm just not going to do it because I don't like that. And that's okay. It's okay to make that decision. But just kind of leaning in and being like, what is it about this? Does it just feel kind of strange that I'm not really going anywhere? Or why do I feel this resistance? What's this about? What is this like what can I learn about myself as I'm noticing the thoughts that come up around moving my body? And I'm just finding that really interesting.
yeah, and I think this is all part of that um, understanding yourself and understanding your relationship with fitness. And like, maybe that speaking on the treadmill, is that thought about running on the treadmill versus outdoors? Like, do you have you in the past maybe perceived one to be better than the other, or is there any kind of attachment to what you were taught to be like, quote, good exercise, or um, has there been that kind of relationship with it? Has there been Is it a case of more boredom in the treadmill? Do you feel like less stimulated
It's
because you're,
definitely boredom. It's not a moral
yeah.
thing for me at all. It's just boring. And in the past I would be like, "Okay, it's boring, just don't do it." And that's fine. And I'm not trying to say that that's not fine,
Mm,
but it's just been interesting to me to be like, "Okay, well, like let's lean into that boredom. Like is it really
mm,
just I'm not feeling stimulated and then I'm just left alone with my thoughts and that's hard for me?" You know what I mean?
yeah.
That's kind of where
No,
I'm coming from with this. Less about like morality or feeling like I'm bad for doing it one way or
mm.
another. It's more the my thoughts are loud and clear.
And I think that's really interesting because a lot of people, not to say you do, but a lot of people engage in exercise, and it is a fantastic kind of um, coping tool. It's not the sole tool and never should be, but it can be a great tool to help deal with emotion and process emotion. But also, I think sometimes we find it really difficult to be in our heads, so we want to be in our bodies more because that feels easier in some ways rather than, like you say, being in your head. And I wonder if that, yeah, being alone with your thoughts is the harder part because um, there's nowhere to distract. There's
Yeah,
no distraction there.
exactly. And
And I
that
think
feels
that's,
interesting to me, right? Like that feels like, oh, this is the work I'm trying to do, but it's on this different level where there's also maybe some discomfort in my body too, right? Like, or not discomfort, but just like I'm tired or I'm
mm,
breathing hard and just noticing how I kind of want to run away from that sometimes.
yeah. And I think it's really difficult for, like, with intuitive eating, everyone's going to come at it with their own past and work through things with their own pace. And I almost feel like this is almost like how we apply gentle nutrition towards the end and kind of, leave that piece as something we incorporate back in, like, as we kind of the pendulum kind of reaches the middle rather than swinging, hard left, hard right. And I think it's the same with fitness. I think we this this awareness, I think, is part of that kind of gentle guidance I talk about it in fitness, but it is that yeah, having that deeper understanding of how you feel about things and maybe pushing through pain or pushing through discomfort because it's for the greater benefit. Um, but I think there's a point with engaging with intuitive movement the same way with intuitive eating that for some people they may not be able to pushing past discomfort and doing things that they dislike is and not doing those things, should I say, is part of the healing
Yeah,
process
for
and is
sure.
very much part of the, like, getting fitness back on their own terms. And I think it's interesting, you're clearly at the point where you're like, fitness is very much on my terms, but now I'm really like getting into the layers of it and you know how I connect to it. And I think that's really cool. I think that's a really interesting place to be and something to observe within yourself. Um, but I do think that I think it's really interesting about, are we able to be in our bodies, be in our minds, and um, and be there and do those hard things, those uncomfortable moments, physical moments and emotional moments together. And I think that can be really powerful for people. And I think overcoming that can be really powerful. But it's very on an individual level. I think it's something that each person, I think, has to be at that um, that has to have that level of trust and
Yeah.
that relationship needs to be pretty solid, I think. But it's really interesting. I mean, I feel like I don't get to have these kind of conversations often, so this is very exciting. I'm glad you brought this up.
Yeah, and I hope that nobody heard what I said as this is the way it should be. I just wanted to sort of share that that it is interesting to sort of go through your own process with this and find out what is interesting to you and what can you
Mm,
learn and what does come up and how do you handle that in context of what's going on in your life and how you're feeling and how you're checking in with yourself. And maybe that, just for me, it looks different day to day. I'm not someone who advocates for, put like quote unquote pushing through discomfort. When I was saying that earlier, that was really more referencing like I'm not as physically uncomfortable as I am mentally. And so that's
mm,
interesting to me. That's really interesting to me that I find it harder to move when I'm less stimulated. And what does that mean? And I don't know if there's like I'm not trying to imply that there's a moral side to this, like this is the right way to be. It's just kind of where I am lately is just noticing how interesting movement can be beyond the of course, beyond the numbers or beyond the more morality of moving or the I'm a good person because I moved my body today. Like what can you reclaim as a part of movement that you find rewarding or kind of a portal into your own mind or your own kind of way of moving through the world? And I'm just finding as I get more curious about that, it's pretty interesting. I think there's a lot there.
yeah, and I agree, and I think um, that's a really interesting thing to explore and to kind of understand. And I mean, for me, my my thing for me personally recently has been learning to rest more and allowing rest and um, removing judgment, but also realizing how I have used fitness so much as a distraction in my life for so long that how do I keep working on this to engage with it when it's truly for me and it's not a total distraction technique, and that is a fine line. And sometimes it's a positive distraction, but understanding when I'm avoiding that, avoiding that emotional work that I personally need to do right now versus engaging with exercise and, moving my body to help me through that work. Does that
Yeah.
make sense? You know,
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think for so many, movement is very much can be very much of a distraction of like as long as I just keep moving, I never really am alone with myself or alone with my thoughts. Definitely.
and I've done that in not just a physical sense. I've done that in a work sense, in a life sense, in a, if I just keep moving, I don't have to stand still and
Yes.
acknowledge the
Yes.
stuff. And, that's what this, I mean, 2020 has been a hell of a year so far, but, you know, having a forced slow down and then, even giving myself even more time to slow down. Um, this has been kind of a huge learning curve for me in the sense of like, I need to stop moving and stand still a little bit and let everything else catch up with me. Um, and I think that's been a really interesting. And so that applies to how I engage with fitness too. And it's not that I don't engage with exercise, but it's also realizing that there's going to be periods of my life when I need to rest more, and there's going to be periods of my life when I feel in a place that I can move more, and that's okay either way. That's just part of growing and learning as a human, and um, that's part of building that trust with yourself. I often say to people in general when we're kind of talking about you know getting to a good place with fitness and movement, and I always want to encourage people to think about the big picture and the long term, and that you can engage with a form of movement at any point in your life, and doing the work now may include slowing down, stopping, may include doing something completely different than you've done before. It's not to say you won't do really challenging things in the future, but it's all about when we're working on shifting the intention and shifting the mindset to approach movement as self-care and as enjoyment and as something that is something you're giving to yourself rather than doing to yourself. That takes time
Ooh, that's
and
beautiful. I love that.
work. I would love to take credit for that, but I had one of my good friends, Kimberly Wilson. She's a psychologist, and that's how she says she describes fitness to people in that setting. Like think of your workout, think of your choice of movement as something you give to yourself rather than you do to yourself. And I think, yeah, I would love to take credit for that, but it's absolutely Kimberly's quote.
Yeah, and just to bring this full circle, I'm so glad you talked about rest because as I was explaining that, I'm finding it very interesting to look at what I can learn about myself through movement. I also think it's very important to mention that it's also potentially very interesting to learn to look at what you can learn about yourself as you choose to intentionally rest your body too, right? So this isn't just a one-sided thing. It's like, oh, I'm feeling tired today. I'm going to rest. Or I just don't want to do that right now. And I'm going to intentionally rest my body and just noticing how that feels. Like that feels so interesting to me beyond the physical.
Mm. And I think so many of us, movement can often be habitual and something that's scheduled into our lives. And, we kind of get to A to B throughout our week and we have to tick the box of doing that run that we always do on a Wednesday or and that's not a bad thing. That's not to say that's a bad thing. That's not to say that that actually can't be part of your intuitive relationship with exercise eventually. But I think it's also interesting to say that like what happens when you slow down or rest on days that you normally would do something and what does that bring up for you as an individual and why I think some people my interactions with people generally there's a sense of anxiety, of nerves, of kind of fear of taking extended periods of rest. If it was someone has an injury and they have to take 6 weeks off or 2 months off, and that can really that can kind of freak people out. And I think that's interesting. What's that? What can that tell you? If you feel freaking out about, I mean, people with COVID-19, that's really hitting people hard um, with their breath and their lungs, and that recovery is a slow process. And for people who are normally super active and have had a lot of energy and potentially have been recovering from that, I think that must be really interesting. Like, how is that? What does that tell you about your relationship with exercise, and what does it tell you about your identity as a mover, as a fitness person, as someone who has a strong sense of community, maybe an identity in fitness? Not that those things are necessarily, like we said, they're not bad, but it's just interesting to observe how you relate to exercise and how that impacts the way you kind of show up and your identity. And I think that's really interesting. So I imagine that whilst we're in a period where gyms have been closed and classes haven't been on, that we've been doing online stuff. And I imagine that's brought up a lot of things for people who, have always gone to maybe the same 3 classes every week or and that they're having to do things a bit differently and maybe adapt and change what they've been doing. And I wonder how I would love to hear people give feedback on, what that has shown for them and how that has made them reflect on, yeah, how they engage with fitness and what truly makes them feel good and the intention behind what they're doing and what they got out of it. And I think, like I said, it's not saying that all these things are bad and there's a negative judgment on it. I think it's just a sense of curiosity and it's an opportunity to learn and it's an opportunity to, yeah, just have that more intel on that relationship. And I think kind of as you've been saying about your, your treadmill and stuff, I think it's kind of gathering information and you kind of just unearth more kind of signals and understanding about yourself and your body and how you enjoy movement.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, Tally, let's dive into your book called Train Happy. And the tagline is An Intuitive Exercise Plan for Everybody. Talk about writing this book, the process of it, how it's been for you. It's pretty vulnerable to put yourself out there on that degree, I would imagine. And yeah, let's just hear about kind of general thoughts about the process of writing this book and what you hoped to put into the world.
Yeah, so, I went to drama school and I've been a personal trainer and I never anticipated writing a book and I never thought I had anything meaningful to say. And yet, I've been kind of sharing my work online in a kind of, um, throughout this whole process, I've been documenting my kind of personal and professional journey on Instagram for probably 7, 8 years now. And when I got asked if I wanted to write a book, and it was the first time that I was like, actually, yes, I would love to write about something that I feel is massively missing from the fitness industry. I think when we're in these kind of anti-diet, weight inclusive spaces, obviously there's so much amazing work from dietitians, therapists, all this kind of stuff, but seeking out other fitness professionals has felt really difficult, and I felt that we needed to have this conversation. I mean, there was a massive lack of education for me as a trainer, early on in my career, and even now, the like continuing, um, the dominant paradigm is that to be like weight centric and steeped in diet culture. So much of fitness, like I said, like we're taught to like get the best results for your clients, and as I said before, results is about making people smaller, making muscles bigger, about body manipulation really. Um, and I just had a disconnect anyway. And then discovering this work, like I said, put a lot of the pieces of the puzzle together for me. And I felt that there was a lot to be said about the fitness industry. So I wanted to write a book about my kind of personal journey. That it kind of starts with my story, and that's kind of my perspective is kind of like woven throughout the book because I wanted the reader to know that this is coming from a place of experience and a place of and not from a place of judgment because I think when we discover diet culture, I think sometimes people feel ashamed, and I really wanted to help people, remove that shame and that judgment and help people understand that like it's actually this is the dominant narrative and we've all been doing what we thought was the right thing to do, and actually like have you considered that you could actually not hate yourself and hate moving your body and feeling like it's something you should do because you've been told that you should exercise but you actually hate it. I just want people to the kind of goal of writing the book was I want people to shut the book and go, oh wow, so I can like myself. I can like moving my body. I have the option to, this doesn't have to be about what I weigh and how I look. And I can do this on my own terms. And, I can engage in fitness in a fun way that can be part of my life, but it isn't my whole life. Um, and, I understand how, physical exercise benefits you physically and emotionally, and that's really cool, and I didn't know about that before, and I want to move my body. So that was the intention behind the book, and that's how I got to it. So actually the writing process felt not too bad, I have to say. I went away from the meeting with my editor, who interestingly enough approached me because she'd been to a couple of events that I'd spoken at and had followed my work, and I'd been kind of encouraging this approach on social media, but she had said that she'd gone to a personal trainer and said, I'm really interested in doing more weight training. I'd really like to get strong, and I want to focus on that. And the personal trainer insisted on putting her on a meal plan and doing progress photos and all this stuff that she did not sign up for, did not ask for, did not want. She just wanted to just move her body without all of that stuff, and that just didn't seem like it was an option. And I think she saw that we shared the same view, and I'm really glad she kind of um, asked me if I thought I had something in me. So yeah, got writing a plan right away, and this time last year I was like in the depths of writing and making this book happen, and I wanted to just pack in as much as I could. Um, in a relatively short in a relatively small word count. I wanted to put as much information in there about what is diet culture, kind of a basics of like the science of weight loss, and you know, talking about the how ineffective dieting can be and how detrimental it can be, and also talking about how fitness plays into our mental health and our body image, how it also, so that's in our happy section. Then we have the eat section, which we're discussing intuitive eating, and that was massively helped with input from Jessie Haggerty, who I'm sure you must have had at your podcast at some point.
Yeah, love her.
And then we went to the train section, which is obviously the kind of bulk of the book, and that is all about, you know, how does diet culture show up in fitness, and how has that affected your relationship with fitness, and how can we build an intuitive approach to exercise, and taking those 10 principles. I actually ended up doing 9, because obviously one of the principles is joyful movement. So we're kind of, the whole thing is joyful movement, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we kind of put a fitness take on each of those principles, and you know, made it kind of applicable to how that may impact how you relate to fitness. Then we kind of go through, you know, as I spoke about gentle nutrition, I talk about gentle guidance as being the kind of final principle. And same with intuitive eating. It's not something you necessarily do in order, but generally you know, I think that part about, so when we're talking about gentle guidance, let me just go there. You know, I would never expect someone to intuitively run a marathon. That wouldn't be safe. That wouldn't be advisable as a fitness professional. I just wouldn't say someone like, oh, you're just going to wake up one day and run 26 miles. Like, I don't expect that to be the case. So you're going to have some sort of programming and planning and some sort of routine in there and structure to achieve that goal. But it's I encourage people to allow for flexibility within that structure, to not get rigid, and obviously, as we've kind of already discussed, like really think about the intention behind your engaging in that goal. What's the goal for? Why, you know, why are you wanting to achieve this goal? And how can, like we said, you keep listening to your body, keep trusting yourself, and allow for flexibility within that. So
Yeah, and
I
you
think
do a
that's
really
really,
good job of explaining that in the book. Like there's so much there. I love that. So let's talk a little bit
yeah.
about, oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
I was just going to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about just kind of the overarching theme of, obviously it's called Train Happy. And I thought you made some really great points about kind of some action items of what people can do to kind of take it from this nice sounding concept, like, oh, that sounds great. Yeah, I'm on board with the concept, but how do I actually implement it? And you give a lot of, you know, a couple really good points about kind of bringing it down to earth. So I thought we would focus on some of those. Does that sound okay to you?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So one of your points is to work to shift the focus from aesthetics to function, joy, mood, quality of life. And these are some things that we've already sort of alluded to so far, but I thought we could speak to this directly. How do people start making that shift?
I think I think it starts with, we're talking about rejecting the diet mentality in intuitive eating, that being the like foundation or principle. I think it's the same with fitness. You have to decide that you're going to shelve exercise for weight loss for the time, at least for the time being. You're going to just say, look, that way has been painful and frustrating and hard and, you know, uncomfortable for long enough, and I'm just going to try it another way. And whilst engaging in this work, it's about like I said before, shifting that mindset from, okay, I'm not going to be punishing myself anymore. This is not physical punishment. This is not about penance for things I've eaten. This is not about earning food. This is no longer about that. This is about something I'm giving to myself. This is myself. This is my act of self-care. And it's not my act of self-punishment. And it's something I'm going to try and do to feel good, to connect with myself, to connect with others, um, on a greater, stronger level. And yeah, so I would say the first place to start is to just mentally shelve the idea that when you work out, it has to have an impact on on your weight or on your appearance. And just say that, like, any changes to my body are a byproduct. They may or may not happen. There are no promises. Each person's different. So rather than putting that pressure and expectation on myself and on this, I'm going to just try and come at this with a kind of open mind, and I'm going to have a go at doing this to feel good and notice the difference and acknowledge the difference. And I encourage journaling for people throughout the this process. And I talk about ways in which you can track progress within your fitness sessions. And one of the ways I talk about is like a mood tracker. And, whether that's writing down, how did you feel before the session? How do you feel after the session? Maybe how did you feel during the session? But kind of really, really kind of putting down on paper what's going on in that time and how that's impacting you. And using that as a progress rather than any picture. That's a true testament to how this is, like I said, impacting your mental health and how you feel, rather than getting bogged down with looking in the mirror and feeling like you're not getting anywhere. Because I think we've all tried that, and many of us are still struggling with that. And it doesn't feel like that gets any easier. So how does it feel to just do this from a place of kindness and, yeah, like I said, respect,
Yeah, and it
self-respect?
sounds like, and this totally aligns with how I see it too, is it's not it's not just a one-time thing of decision where you're like, okay, I'm just going to focus on function, joy, and mood, and I'm not going to get sucked in or ever think about the way that my body looks or aesthetics. And it's less about like a turning point or a never go or an all or nothing thing. It's a practice, and it's kind of a commitment to remain curious and experimental and kind of shift little things and notice how did that feel and kind of check in with intentions and be gentle with yourself if and when your thoughts sort of start to get right back where they used to be in that unhelpful place, and just know that it's kind of a messy process, and journal along the way so that you can check in with yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I really love what Evelyn Tribbley talks about. There's no kind of mistakes in intuitive eating. Everything's just a learning process and a little bit of a learning curve. And I think it's the same for how we do this in fitness. Like there's no right way or totally wrong way to do this. There's just, you know, stuff happens and you learn from it. And
Exactly.
whether you feel like you might do something differently again in the future or not, either way, that's just an opportunity to learn, and I think and grow with it. Um, and yeah, I think that's really important because I really want, like I said, this is such an individual thing for each person in terms of their past experience with fitness. I think for some people, you know, for particularly the people who've been so in the diet cycle and have been kind of just have really traumatic experiences of PE at school and or maybe in gym environments where people have not been treated well. It is really tough to come back to exercise, something that may hold a lot of pain for you, or maybe if we're speaking in the context of eating disorders, it may have been a huge part of the disorder. And I think, as I said before, when we've been in all or nothing headspaces, when things have been painful and difficult and so associated with restriction and deprivation, um, that, like I said, that pendulum may need to swing. If it's been a hard left, it might need to swing a hard right to find that sweet spot in the middle. And this whole process is about you finding your sweet spot in your own way, in your own time. And hopefully this book and, helps to give you some tools and knowledge to help you do that.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, this work is about helping people get more, free up headspace from worrying about food and exercise to worry about, um, you know, to find greater meaning and purpose and to be able, this might free up someone's headspace to write a book. I said before, I never thought I'd write a book. And I think when I was in the depths of diet culture, I never thought this book would happen. And I actually wrote that in the book. I said, if you asked me years ago when I was just meal prepping my food every night and worrying about my gym workouts and tracking everything and, eat, sleep, gym, repeat, there was no headspace to write a book. There was no headspace to, um, you know, we're in a time right now where, social justice issues are at the forefront. And I would never have had the headspace to engage with that before when I was stuck in diet culture. And all of this stuff, I really hope it's about helping free up headspace so that you get to just live life more fully. That fitness, for me, for coming from a place of that obsessive and controlling relationship with exercise, it was about making fitness something that was part of my life, but was not my whole life, was not my whole identity, so that I could be open to having new and more fulfilling experiences. And like I said, like have a greater understanding of the world and being engaged in the world in a way that I never was before. And I hope that that's the ultimate goal of this work, I think, and I don't know if you agree.
I totally agree. And that's what brings meaning into my work too. There's only so much I enjoy talking about carbohydrate, fat, and protein, right? Like it's just
Yeah.
it's so ugh. But when I put my work in context of this might be a small part of what frees someone to be able to do what they're good at to make this world a better place, that's where I get really, really excited. And I think that would just be my way of paraphrasing what you just beautifully said is that's what this is about, right? It's just helping people have more time and energy to go out and do what matters to them and what's important to them and to help our world be better. Because as long as we are so caught up in what we're eating and how we're moving, it's really hard to get anything meaningful done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, and it feels like uh, this year feels like, you know, such a pivotal moment. And I think um, there's so much work to still be done when it comes to diet culture as well. And I think that is a part of it's, how we're talking about the distraction. It is that distraction on a larger scale. It is um, that way of being distracted, like I said, from that that greater picture, that wider world. And I really hope that if this book helps, so it's kind of cheesy, but if this book helps one person feel like they have more headspace to to really go after what they want and do and fight for the things they believe in, then that is incredible.
Yeah, I agree. I think it does just that. So we're running a little low on time. I just want to mention two other points you make, and then I'll give you my last question. Just in context of the idea of training happy, I just want to kind of have people take away a couple action items. So that this one we've just been talking about is trying to work to shift the focus and the intention from aesthetics or punishment to function, joy, mood, quality of life, those types of things. The second point you make is working on accepting an evolving body. And I know for me in my life, this has been huge, just recognizing bodies change, they're supposed to change. This is this is good, this is not a sign that you're doing something wrong, or this is bad. This is part of life. And so I love that. And I wish we could elaborate, but don't have a ton of time left. And then the other one that the other point you make that I just want to say in context here so that people can think about it and explore it maybe in their own world or of course when they buy the book, extrinsic motivation versus intrinsic motivation. So finding your why in from a place that's really coming from that positive, grounded, wise part of you, not the part of you that's looking to perform or looking to fit in or feeling insecure. Um, is there anything you want to just say quickly in those other 2 points before we move on to the last question?
Yeah, so okay, on the kind of body acceptance part, I think that's a huge part of stepping away from diet culture, and I think that's a stumbling block for a lot of people is, when you let go of that, um, let go of that need to control and actively, proactively diet, your body may change and your shape may change, and that feels really disconcerting for so many of us because we're taught that we should kind of look the same and weigh the same as our 21-year-old selves, and we should never look any different. And I think, yeah, for me, a huge part of that is, and something I kind of speak to a lot in the book is about body neutrality. So not necessarily the concept of having to love yourself 24, of love your body 24/7, but really just accepting that your body is your body, and you're actually more than a body. And I'm a huge advocate of Lindsay and Lexi Kite of Beauty Redefined, and their kind of their mantra, which is one I quote daily to myself, if not on every interview and anything I do, is your body is an instrument to be used, not an ornament to be looked at. And I think that applies so brilliantly to how we think about fitness. I think that's such a brilliant perspective, and teaching us not to focus on what we're doing rather than what we're looking like. And I think that's awesome. And then if you could remind me of that third point.
The point of finding intrinsic motivation.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so maybe a quick example of this to maybe just to help people kind of understand it a bit better is, that the intrinsic motivation, like we said, is the trust, is the knowing, is finding out the why for you, and that's coming from you and not coming from external sources. So that extrinsic motivation, that is the getting ready for your wedding. That is the external factor of the holiday, that your summer vacation. That is you know making sure that when you go to an event that people think you look a certain way and you present yourself in a certain way, and feeling the pressure from external beauty standards to um, show up a certain way. And that's a really basic kind of example there. And it's really, and I think actually it really ties in nicely to that acceptance part, because I think when you're starting to internalize that, like I said, your body is an instrument to be used, not an ornament to be looked at, and that your body is a good body no matter what, and you start to accept yourself, you also start to trust yourself and trust that you get to show up in the world how you choose to, and you're not there for other people's consumption, you're there for yourself. And I think those two kind of tie in really nicely together. And yeah, finding that intrinsic motivation may change the way you engage with exercise. It may change what you choose to do. And I think the opening question of the book
Oh, I love this. Yay, I'm glad you're
yeah,
bringing this up. Yeah.
yeah, and it's the kind of like the final question that I would like to leave people is like, if exercise had no impact on your weight or your appearance, what would you do? And would you still exercise? And if so, what would you do? And what would you do? And that's your intrinsic stuff there. That's the internal stuff, because that's about you. That's about what you like. That's about what you want. It's not about what other people want. It's not about what we've been told in magazines we should do. That's about you. So that's my kind of final, like, that's my favorite question to get people to really start thinking about this, because I think we've just been, I mean, I was so conditioned for so long to engage with exercise in a certain way because I had to get certain results. You know, I read the fitness magazines and they told me this is what I should do, and I never once asked myself, what do I want to do? I never once asked myself that. Not really.
And that
Um,
question is so profound in so many realms of life to even
mm,
learn how to ask yourself that, to learn how to assess your needs and wants and values to be able to get to an answer, whether that's with movement or food or relationships or professional life or parenting or whatever it is. This is such a powerful skill to develop because it's usually not really something we're taught.
no, it's kind of like this. It's like this big missing piece that I think when you discover it, you're like, oh,
Yeah.
this makes a lot of life make a lot more sense.
Yeah.
I don't know. That was how I felt about it.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, last quick question. Let's just do a rapid fire response here. So, if someone's listening and they're interested in working with a personal trainer, and by the way, I think you'd agree, like you don't have to do that. That's not the only way to move,
Mm.
but that is an option. If someone is wondering that, I'd like to just talk about how can they approach that in a way what are questions they could ask? How could they find someone who is going to be helping them with the type of fitness that you're talking about here instead of running into the situation that I think your editor shared with you, that it just felt like what I heard when you were explaining that story, it just felt like a real lack of consent in the type of work that she wanted. And I think I just want you to speak to how does a person find a good fit? How do they find and ensure that there will be consent involved in the process, which in my line of work, that's a huge deal. But it's, it, I've experienced that too with personal trainers who just kind of run with the one way that they've maybe learned or thought of it and not really been open to let's look at this a different way. How can someone find that right fit for them?
Well, one of the first books I read that I've actually related to was Louise Green's book, Big Fit Girl. And so I recommend that as further reading for anyone listening as well. And she talks about a concept called being the CEO of your body. You're the CEO and you're hiring people to help you. So you are not at the mercy of the personal trainer. You are, when you're finding professionals to work with, you know, you are interviewing them essentially in that initial consultation, and you can ask questions, you can go in there, and I think there's a bit of a weird power dynamic with trainers and clients where sometimes I think the client can be a bit intimidated by the trainer, sometimes maybe physically intimidated by the trainer, particularly I think if they're male and, you know, fit into that kind of bodybuilder stereotype. um, and so it's difficult to feel like you actually have the questions, but you're hiring someone to help you with your health, and you deserve the best person for you. So I really want to just empower people with that to begin with. In my book, I've kind of listed some questions to ask, but I think I think you need to, you know, ask, you know, state that you don't want to focus on weight or transformations or anything like that, and you'd really love to focus, you want to learn how to lift weights, for example. That's a really common thing that I work with people on, and you just need to ask, like, how would you track our progress? You know, how would you you know, make set goals for me? How would we do that together? You can also, I think it's also really important to ask, what qualifications do you have in terms of fitness, but also because there's such a, one of my bugbears about the fitness industry is that a lot of personal trainers think they're qualified nutritionists and dietitians as well, and we really learn the bare minimum on 2-day courses that you go to uni and do in 4 years, and there's no way we can possibly give we should never give detailed meal plans and things like that. So I always say, like, if I wanted to have help with with nutrition, do you have someone you can refer me to? Or do you have the relevant qualification, but do you have someone you can refer me to? And I think that's really important. And then, of course, if you are specifically looking for a weight inclusive personal trainer, a Haze-based personal trainer, there's a few databases you can check out. So I know that Superfit Hero, the activewear brand, has a Haze aligned database. I think that's mainly in the US, but I do know that some UK trainers are on there as well. But I think that's a really good place to start to find someone in your area. Those people are probably few and far between, truthfully. But I think if you're specifically looking for something like that, that's a good place to start. But like I said, you are the customer at the end of the day. You need to hopefully you encounter an open-minded fitness professional who is willing to adapt their ways and be open-minded to working in a different way. And I think, there are personal trainers that want to do that. And, I'm very excited that, off the back of this book being out there in the world now, that I get interactions from PTs saying like, oh, wow, this is how I want to work. And I think that's exciting. So that's huge. And, we want more trainers being open-minded to this work and this approach, because I think ultimately it's more inclusive, and therefore I think more people benefit. And I just, I think that's a good place to start though. Just kind of ask them, how can you help me? And without focusing on, my weight aesthetics, and really start there.
Okay, that's great advice. All right, well, thank you so much for being here. Will you take a minute to talk about where people can find you, where people can find your book and your work, and any other relevant kind of resources?
Yeah, so you can find me best on social media, so probably best on Instagram, really, which is at Tally Rye. And you can find links to my book there as well, but it's on Amazon US, Amazon UK. But I totally understand if you want to buy from local, more independent shops, you can either order through them individually, or there are other sites that do stock them. I'm not great knowing off the top of my head. And in terms of what's coming up, I suppose this pandemic has put a lot of things on hold in my life. But if you want to stay up to date, you can, like I said, follow along on social media, and all things get announced on there first. I should also plug my own podcast. I have the Train Happy podcast, and that really aims to look at sections of the book in more depth, look at themes within the book in more depth with the relevant professionals. So people I've spoken about in this episode, such as Kimberly Wilson, the psychologist, and Lindsay and Lexi Kite from Beauty Redefined, have done episodes with me, and they've been, really well received, and I think really complement and get to go into even greater depth than the book allows. So you can find that at the Train Happy podcast.
All right, perfect. Tally, thanks so much for sharing all of that. And I'll be sure to list how to keep in touch with you in the show notes, and how to purchase your book in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for your time. It was lovely to connect with you, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you so much for having me, Paige. This has been lovely.
Well, I sincerely hope you've enjoyed this conversation. If you haven't already, please go ahead and leave a review on iTunes. Thanks again so much for listening, and we'll see you soon for another episode.